Croeso blas Nanteos. And this evening we're not in the main house, we're in what's called the Muse House, which is a wonderful self-catering unit at the back of the main house of Nanteos, and it was part of the stable complex in the 19th century and the 18th century. And here we are in what is the boot room, and as we can see, we've got lots of bits of tack. It isn't 18th century tack, it's modern tack, but it's very good at creating the atmosphere. And Nanteos hasn't been totally renovated, and that's what makes it so exciting. In fact, until about 2 years ago, the attics, the second story in Nanteos, wasn't renovated, and one could go up there and see all sorts of detritus left behind by the family and by families that have owned it since the 1950s. You could see graffiti on the wall and layers of old wallpaper and furniture that's no longer used, and books and papers and artifacts, clothes. So the same is true about the stables at Nanteos. And Nanteos, like Gogerthan and Trowsgoid, were extremely famous in their time for their hounds, for their hunting, for their horses. And although, as we said last week, Nanteos wasn't a big house like Gogerthan, Nanteos we mustn't think of as a Chatsworth. The stables were very, very fine at Plas Nanteos, and the ones we see today, if you're lucky enough to come and visit the hotel, are 19th century stables. And up until the 60s, 70s, there was fine statuary on the entrance to the stables. There were eagles, there were horses. They're no longer there, they've been sold off. I think it was probably to pay for a new roof and the lead on the roof, so I'm afraid in times when cash is short, it was a fair exchange. So if you were to come now and stay in the self-catering wing that is the Muse stables, you would actually stay in rooms that have been created out of the fine stalls for the hunters and for the pedigree animals that would have been used by the Powells. Just across the courtyard is an area that has been largely unchanged since its heyday in the early 20th century, late 19th century. And there are stalls there that you could, with a little bit of fresh hay, a little bit of fresh straw as bedding, you could move a horse in there tomorrow. So it's very exciting for people like me. It's lovely that the house looks nice, spick and span in the fine rooms, but it's also great when parts of an estate are left as they would have been. So one can imagine the people just having stepped out of the past and back into the present in the stables and that sort of area. So hunting was extremely important for the Powell family, as it was for any gentry squires in the 18th century. Talking today about 1750, which is when my two books, The Shadow of Nanteos and The Dipping Pool, are set. And right up until the 1950s, hunting was still an extremely important part of life on Plas Nanteos estate. And I've met a wonderful woman, I'll name check her, Joy Neal, who actually remembers bringing her pony over to Nanteos on Christmas night and tending the Boxing Day hunt, the fox hunt that came out of Nanteos and ranged across the hills in this part of rural Wales. And of course there was lots associated with it, lots of social life associated with it. The hunt ball, it was very much on the social calendar of people at the time. We now have got a very different attitude to our treatment of animals. We still mistreat animals, of course, in factory farms and in industrial slaughterhouses. We put hens in cages, we keep pigs in crates, but of course it's all out of sight. Whereas, of course, the mistreatment of animals, if you like, in the 18th century was something really quite commonplace. So, for instance, in Boxing Day they would hunt the squirrels. Over Easter, a hen would be buried up to its neck in the grass, and people would take it in turns throwing sticks and stones at the hen. And if you managed to chop the hen's head off or kill the hen, you could then take the hen home and roast her over Easter. So what was hunted? Well, anything and everything, from hares to foxes to otters. And in my two books, I've used the hunt as a motif that runs right through the two books. It's a very good way of getting men away from the house. As a novelist, it's a very good way of getting the men away from the women. Of course some women did hunt. Of course some women rode extremely well. My character, Elizabeth Powell, in The Shadow of Nanteos, she's a good rider. That's one of the contrasts that I make between her and Mary Powell, her contemporary, the heroine of The Dipping Pool. I show her as a brave rider, almost a rash or reckless rider. And that same recklessness that she feels when she's out on the mountain galloping across the wastes with the bailiff of Nanteos, she then brings to other parts of her life. So, in general, however, it was the men that would hunt and shoot. And it was a very important outlet for them, not only socially. They would employ bailiffs, ostlers, huntsmen, people who would keep the hounds, and the hound house at Nanteos, the kennels, was almost as well built in terms of architecture as was the house itself. So a huge cast of characters are set in place in order to do the hunting of which Nanteos was so famous. And across the two books, I have one consistent baddie. He was a real historical character. He was called Herbert Lloyd. He later became a baronet. And he was known at the time as a thoroughly rotten guy. He was notorious, in fact, for his treatment, not only of other people, his contemporaries, but particularly for his treatment of the ordinary people. As a magistrate, he went beyond the bounds of duty in order to be cruel. One particular case is of Anne Morgan, who was a destitute woman, a beggar, a vagrant, and he was legally required to cause her to be carted, which was stripped to the waist, tied behind a cart, and beaten publicly through the town. Now, that was just an ordinary sentence in the 1750s. But Sir Herbert Lloyd took it upon himself to have this woman, this vagrant, Anne Morgan, carted not just through Cardigan, but also through Aberystwyth. So, to me as a novelist, when I read things like that about the characters I'm exploring, that shows me that there is that streak there that I can then use. When I then hear about him, that he was at the head of a gang of followers, of henchmen of Thomas Powell and William Powell later, who were actually fighting up in the mines and taking by pistol point, by sword and by pistol point, one of the Crown representatives, taking him, throwing him in Cardigan jail. Again, that tells me that this man goes further than is required in order to be brutal, cruel and violent. And I can use that. So he becomes my baddie in both books. And I show him first in a scene in Aberystwyth town. The family have been looking out of a tavern window and they see the woman, Anne Morgan, being carted through the public street. And there isn't a modern attitude to that. There's an acceptance that that is done. We haven't even reached the Enlightenment by 1750. So things like cruelty to animals, treatment of children, treatment of women, treatment of servants, the great anti-slavery movements haven't taken off really by 1750. But there is a slight distaste in the family in the tavern looking out of the window. But for Herbert Lloyd, that I've shown that things that were normal behaviour but might perhaps not have been indulged in with quite so much enthusiasm. For Sir Herbert Lloyd, there is a real relish. And very importantly in The Shadow of Nanteos, he is seen as having a brutalising influence on the young boy, the young squire, the heir to the Powell estate. And this little boy himself is called Thomas, his father was called Thomas, he's called Thomas. No, his father, I beg your pardon, was called William, he's called Thomas. They did William Thomas for many generations till they got to George. Then they did George a lot. So here we find them at bull baiting. And of course we have bull fighting totally legally in what we would consider a very civilised Europe. And we've only just recently outlawed fox hunting with hounds. So we aren't totally enfranchised really from our sort of bloodlust, but we no longer bait bulls in the bull ring in Birmingham. We no longer bait bulls in the bull ring down in Oxford. We do market gardening instead. So here we go. The young boy has been attracted by the bellowing of the bull, and he's found himself at the bullfight. And this is the first time in the Shadow of Nanteos that we meet our arch baddie, Sir Herbert Lloyd. He is in the crowd in the main square as the bull, now tethered to a specially designated ring, is being baited by dogs. The dogs are short, the better to dodge the animal's sideways kicks, and heavy at the jaw, trained to fasten down low onto the tendons of the bulls. One jumps up, snapping at the animal's testicles, and the bull screams, eyes rolling in his head. Men with sticks are beating the bull, dodging out of the way, to the great delight of the crowd. The frightened animal's dung is everywhere, and one of his tormentors slips in it and is almost struck. But, despite his fine horns, the bull's head is tethered so tightly, pulled so low, no one is in any real danger. Men in the crowd are shouting or groaning, shaking money in their fists. "I'll bet my dog can have him. There'll be 4 dogs down before he's dead. He won't last another 10 minutes at the stake. Who'll take me on it?" Thomas, the little boy, wriggles his way to the front and is transfixed. The bull's ravished leg muscles now unable to support him, he falls down, and the dogs can get at his neck, whilst young boys are allowed free rein to beat the last out of him. Thomas is with them, but no child will let him have a go with their sticks. Suddenly, a gentleman appears from the crowd. He is putting a considerable amount of money into his purse. He offers Thomas a smart cane. "Thank you, sir. Not at all, young man." Thomas beats the bull across the thin skin on his shoulders. The thuds are gratifying, and the boy soon breaks into a sweat. Suddenly, Kai, the bailiff, appears, pushing through the crowd. He shoves aside a clutch of disgruntled gamblers to get to the front, grabs the young Thomas by the collar and drags him away, snatching the cane off him. He is about to snap it in half. "Get off me! Get off, you bully!" Thomas shouts. "Hold, sir. Mine, I believe." The betting man steps forward, holding out a gloved hand. "Oh, Kai," says Sir Herbert. "How pleasant to see you." Reluctantly, Kai returns the battered cane, which the man wipes with an embroidered handkerchief. "You know us then, sir?" asks young Thomas, delighted. "This is Sir Herbert Lloyd, Thomas," Kai says dryly. "Indeed, I am a close business associate, or you could argue even a dear friend of your father's, young man." They move away from the bull ring as the animal is dragged off by a brace of heavy horses to a round of applause, leaving a trail of gore and excrement in its wake. So it was quite regular practice to torment a bull that was going to be slaughtered for meat anyway. And it was also quite regular practice for large crowds to go around the scene, and also for people to gamble. And the gambling, like cockfighting, which was very prevalent at the time, or bear baiting, or any of that sort of thing, depends on how long the animal to be baited can survive and how many dogs it can take out as it goes down. So you can find evidence all over these fine gentry houses or any of the National Trust properties of the great importance to particularly the men of the 18th century and the 19th century and all the times before that in terms of hunting and shooting. And in Llanarcheiron, which is run by the National Trust, a wonderful little gentry villa, later than Nanteos, smaller than Nanteos, but very well worth a visit. There are some rather macabre masks, they call them, so taxidermy masks of foxes, of hares, of otters that were hunted by the fine hounds there. And what I find particularly shocking is not that the animals were killed and hunted, they were seen as pests at the time. Almost anything that wasn't a game bird or wasn't eaten at the table was seen as a pest. So for instance, in the 18th century, there were still eagles in this part of Ceredigion, as far as I understand it. In fact, there's a taxidermy eagle in the old college in Aberystwyth that dates from this period. But if it wasn't a pest and it could be eaten, it could be hunted. But what is particularly disturbing is there's the testimonials next to these masks, and they attest to how long the hunt took. And in some cases, the hunt went on for hours and hours and hours. So if one again uses one's imagination, one can imagine this flight for one's life with, what is it, the unspeakable in pursuit of the inedible, all these people on fine horses and all these, the lesser tiers of society following with their dogs if the animal went to earth. And again, it's something sort of very vivid. So when I was writing about my characters, I had to think this was totally ordinary to these people. The burning at the stake wasn't common practice at the time, but it was still known. The punishment for treason in the 1750s was drawing and quartering. So these people had a different mindset from me, and I found it a real effort, but very much worth the effort, to sort of try and pull, kicking and screaming, this modern 21st century attitude out of myself, and to try and think about how and what was normal to the people in the time of which I'm writing. And one interesting thing was how I managed to use really the hunt as a delineator of character. So everybody hunts in the Shadow of Nanteos, all the men hunt. Everybody enjoys it, but only Sir Herbert really enjoys the cruel end of the hunt. For most people it's a chase. And what we need to think of at this period is all the gentry were hustling, like business people now. They were constantly on a hustle. They were hustling politically, rivaling, jostling, trying to get people to support them in the county elections and the elections for the main parliament. They were hustling, trying to get hold of an heiress, a better heiress with more money and more connections and more property than their neighbour. So they were all on the hustle. And I've enjoyed really portraying these men. They're free from their wives, they're free from listening servants, and a lot of the plot hinges on these little times when the men are out hunting, fox hunting or otter hunting or squirrel hunting. I want to read you, we're going over a little bit over time now, but I would like to read you the fox hunt from the dipping pool. And in my younger days, when I was at UEA, I was a hunt sab. I wasn't a very good hunt sab because I was a bit frightened of being hit over the head by the terrier men, and also I couldn't run very fast. But I did do the hunt sab, so I have been on a hunt. All around the den, here the vixen has gone to earth. Terrier men are putting their dogs in. Tiny, the terrier, is put into the hole and disappears. The bottom of her pad's the last thing to be seen. Her son is inconsolable, leaping into the air and twisting his muscular body around. He'll bloody strangle himself. What's the matter with the silly devil, Parry? But I like his spirit, Thomas Powell laughs. Why do we hold him back? He must get to work. Put him in, man. Powell gestures to the hole. His mother's in there already, sir, says the terrier man. Do as you're told, Lloyd barks. The terrier man hesitates, turns again to Powell. He wants to get to his mother, sir. He slaps the dog hard on the side, but he only jumps higher, snarling and tearing at the rope. We've just put her in, that one, sir. It's his first trip out. You heard, Sir Herbert. What's wrong with you, man? Thomas Powell is shouting now. Parry, the terrier man, looks from one to the other. Nodding to Powell, he bends to untie the dog, taking care to keep his hands from the jaws that seem ready to bite anything. Grasping the dog firmly by the scruff, his other hand scooping up her legs, he walks around to the right, looking for another hole. There doesn't seem to be one. For God's sake, man, engage him. What are you waiting for? But sir, his mother's just gone in. It would be better to place him somewhere else in case he... Can you not hear your master, blackguard? Lloyd turns to Powell. You might need to get yourself a new terrier, man, Powell. I don't like the attitude. God's teeth, just get the dog in the blasted hole! Thomas Powell roars, red in the face. Parry doesn't speak again, but thrusts the struggling young dog into the hole. A couple of men who'd gone around the other side of the den come back. No sign of them, sir. Maybe we didn't lock all of the holes. Maybe the vixen's got out somewhere. Damn! This is the third hunt we've had without anything at the end of it. Oh, here we go! The young terrier, covered in soil, has backed out of the hole and is running backwards and forwards in a frenzy of barking. In a bound, two men crouch just behind the entrance, ready to catch the vixen when she shows her head. And now another figure can be seen, the bandy back legs of little Tiny, as she backs up, drawing the vixen out of her den. A deadly game, but one she's an expert at. Now the vixen's visible as far as her shoulders, and the men lunge forward to grab her. She's out. There's only a brief moment between the fox's head and teeth appearing and the animal flailing in the air, held at arm's length by one of the strongest men in the party, as another two enclose her head and body in a sack. An excellent job. Congratulations. It's Lloyd's voice. But something's wrong. Tiny lies still, her whimpering hidden by the snarls of the fox, the frenzied barks and the shouts of triumph as men and dogs crowd in. Parry picks the bitch up. Part of her cheek is hanging open, fallen blood already cleaning a path through the soil, and her muzzle is torn. He holds the flap of skin down with his thumb as he tucks her under his arm, kicking away her son. Get that bugger tied up. Thomas Powell, turning at last from the glad sight of his fox, all but her tail safely captured in the bag, sees him. Hey, what's those boots with my dogs? But the terrier men only glance at him before the terrier man only glances at him before turning his back and moving away. You come here! The young man stops. By God, you'll take note of me when I talk to you. Thomas Powell covers the ground between them in a few strides. Suddenly he stops. Why? The bitch is bleeding. Yes, sir. She's been bitten by the fox. How so? She's one of our most experienced dogs, is she not? Parry, the terrier man, nods. By now a couple of the other men are standing near them. Well, says Powell, what's gone on then? How has she been bitten in the face? And a nasty one at that, I can imagine. Parry shakes his head. Powell looks around. Well, somebody explain it to me. The young dog was put in behind her, blocking her exit, sir. She couldn't back up when she drew the vixen out. The man looks down, worrying at a clod of earth with the toe of his boot. I see, Thomas replies. I'm sorry for it. He turns and strides away. Lloyd, approaching him, wearing his crop against his boots. That vixen's had my best dog, Lloyd. Poison, a fox's bite. I'm surrounded by fools. Thomas mounts up and wheels around. Kill that blasted thing, won't you? I don't want to see its damn brush again. Hold! Lloyd goes over to where the vixen writhes in the bag. He gives it a kick. I have a better idea. Get that noose around its neck again and break her legs. We'll take it back to the kennels, train the young hounds on it. Get a pliers and rip out most of the teeth too, while you're about it. The gamekeeper is holding the squirming vixen by the brush, the rest of it still in the stout sack, now firmly tied at the base of the tail. Shall I take the brush and release her to the dogs, sir? The man's shouting, his breath uneasy as he deals with the weight of the fox. Did you not hear me? Keep her to train the young dogs on, says Lloyd. Well, what do you mean, sir? I have told you. Disable her, pull the teeth, break the legs, etc., and keep her in a pen, bait the young dogs on her. But what about the brush, sir? A finer tail on a vixen I've not seen for many a season. Oh, you can take that. She'll likely live. In fact, better to take it before you bait her. Won't be much use to you afterwards. Okay, so that story about the youngster going in after its mother comes right from my family, who farm near Edgeworth on the way to Machynlleth. And that actually happened. A young dog was put in behind its mother, and of course the mother then couldn't back out up the tunnel as the fox came towards her. She couldn't back out, and the vixen had her in the face before she managed to get out of the hole. But what's important about that is we see both men like hunting, all of the men like hunting, it's commonplace. But Lloyd, I've shown, goes just one step further and is prepared to torture the animal for her part in biting the terrier. And that is not unheard of in the 20th century as well. I actually got that particular story of baiting young hounds on foxes in captivity from a newspaper article that the RSPCA had discovered this practice was going on, and they prosecuted. So right at the end of the book of the Shadow of Nanteos, hunting is extremely important again, and it's a motive that runs really through both books, as I said. And this time we've got a cross-cutting, lots of short scenes at the end of the Shadow of Nanteos. And in the main house, where the women are in the main house, there's a tragic drama taking place. So there's all hell let loose in the house, it's a February, whereas out on the marshes is a dog otter hunt. And William, Elizabeth's husband, is hunting the otter. The otter by then has become for him a symbol of everything that is wrong, everything that he can't control in his life at Plas Nanteos. And he's out for revenge on the dog otter. So as the tragedy unfolds in Plas Nanteos amongst the women, so the same sort of brutal pantomime is played out on the marshes with the men. And thank you very much for being here with us in this wonderful Muse house. And please do join me next week. Next week I'm going to be talking about some of the techniques I use when I'm writing my novels, both the research and the techniques in trying to actually create the books, put them together. So thank you very much, and nostar, a diolch yn fawr iawn am ymuno â ni heno.